Mercenaries are like fire. Used wisely, they can power a steam engine. Used unwisely, they burn down the whole village.
There's a secret fighting force let loose in war zones that's above international law and fighting in your name. Global superpowers like the US, Russia, and others are paying companies to fight for them. So what can go wrong when armed civilians are doing the work of the military? Hey guys, I'm Shreen, and this Sunday on AJ+, we're looking into the multi-billion-dollar industry of private military contracting and how modern warfare gets a lot more complicated when you pay someone else to fight for you. Remember Afghanistan? The US has been partially outsourcing the war there for 16 years and counting. The secretive fighting forces go by a lot of names: private military contractors, paramilitary groups, and more bluntly, mercenaries. But they're all pretty much the same: armed civilians in battle zones, engaging in military conflict, and making lots of money. The mercenary option is being used by Vladimir Putin, with fighters in Ukraine and Syria, by Nigerian leaders to combat Boko Haram, and even in the US, when the private firm Tiger Swan was hired to spy on pipeline protesters at the Standing Rock Reservation. And this type of fighting force is not new. To find out more, we talked to Sean McFate, a former mercenary. He clued us into the history stretching all the way back to the Middle Ages.
For centuries, they were underground, they were in the shadows in places like the Congo and Africa and so forth. But the US military, of all people, of all organizations, has resurrected mercenaries in the wars of Iraq and Afghanistan.
After serving as a US Army officer, Sean worked for a private security firm in Liberia and Burundi.
There are more mercenaries around. They have more connections, more experience, they're veterans, and they are much more powerful than they were even 20 years ago.
So the US is no stranger to the concept of mercenaries. The country has contracted armed forces as far back as World War II. During the recent wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, it's estimated that the proportion of contractors to troops leapt to as much as 50%. Most of them were hired to cook meals or translate for the military, but some of them did engage in combat. No one knows with certainty exactly how many of these mercenaries are on the ground today because the US government doesn't keep track. And that obscurity is intentional. They're essentially an invisible fighting force. It's one of the reasons the US military likes to use contractors, according to McFate.
They don't count as casualties. Americans get really upset if we increase boots on the ground in a place like Afghanistan, and they get even more upset when our soldiers come back in body bags. But nobody asks about private military contractor deaths. Nobody tracks it, nobody even knows.
Another reason the US military likes to hire mercenaries is that it allows the military to have a zero footprint. That means you can't trace responsibility for a risky mission or civilian deaths back to the US government.
They provide plausible deniability. What that means is when a mercenary does something bad, the US government can just wash their hands and say, oh, those are bad mercenaries, that was a bad company.
But hold on. We're about to explain what that means for us right now. The Trump administration has been looking at using more private military contracts in Afghanistan and requested proposals from two people who donated big to his campaign. Eric Prince, ex-Navy SEAL and founder of the security firm Blackwater, donated $250,000 to Trump's campaign and the party. And in the previous two wars, Blackwater mushroomed to $1 billion contracting giant. His new company would likely profit from the latest push in Afghanistan. And money talks. Eric Prince's sister, Betsy DeVos, donated about $2.7 million to Trump's campaign, and now holds a cabinet-level position as education secretary. If it was up to Eric Prince, his company would take over the entire military operation in Afghanistan. And let's not forget about Trump's other influential donor, Steven Feinberg, the owner of DynCorp. He and his wife paid about $2.2 million to the group supporting Trump. And his company, DynCorp, already made $2.5 billion from the State Department training the police force in Afghanistan. Even Trump's chief of staff, John Kelly, was a DynCorp advisor before joining the administration. So why is it so problematic these companies have a direct line to the White House? There is almost zero accountability for corporations in this business. The world of private security contracting isn't regulated like a government agency, and that's dangerous for a few reasons. First, visibility. Agencies like the Department of Defense have mandatory reporting obligations by nature of being in the public sector, and DoD decisions can be openly scrutinized. And second, Congresspeople have to answer to their constituents and are under constant pressure to end the unpopular wars abroad. Private firms are free of these pressures, and they want to keep fighting.
Mercenaries breed conflicts. Mercenaries are incentivized to start wars or elongate them. They don't have to obey your authority, and they can even work against you. They can be underbought by your enemy.
Another reason the increased use of mercenaries might cause problems: when you hire private security firms, everything they do is proprietary, and there are few consequences when things go wrong. Remember these disturbing images from Abu Ghraib in Iraq? The US-run military prison became infamous after private military contractors and others carried out abuses. Prisoners were stripped naked and electrocuted. 256 Iraqis sued the firms CACI International and Titan Corporation for war crimes and cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment. But the Supreme Court shut down the case in 2011. Another case against CACI International is still ongoing. Then there's the Nisour Square massacre in Iraq in 2007. Blackwater contractors opened fire on civilians, killing 17 people and wounding 20. The incident sparked at least 5 investigations. But Blackwater was never sentenced, and the US government is still working with its current incarnation. Michael Ratner, a human rights attorney who worked on many of these cases at the Center for Constitutional Rights, told MSNBC,
"There's a culture essentially of impunity, of allowing excessive use of force, allowing reckless use of force that encourages Blackwater employees to kill innocent people."
Even if the US reversed its strategy and eliminated military contractors in Afghanistan, it wouldn't change the reach of the global industry.
This is a multi-billion-dollar industry that is growing, and it's not going to go away. I think whether America wants to do it or not, we're going to be relying on armed contractors going forward, and it will be a part of the American way of war.
And the reach of these groups doesn't end with nations waging war. It extends to extractive industries like oil and mining companies hiring armed security, and even mercenaries at sea guarding shipping routes from pirates. Private mercenaries have the potential to upend the status quo of global affairs. So what will our world look like when military force becomes a commodity on the global marketplace? We just scratched the surface when it comes to mercenaries, and there is so much more to consider. What happens when these invisible soldiers come home and don't have any VA benefits? And what about the countries they're invading and their sovereignty? Let us know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.